Hello, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, I think. This project, unfortunately, has become one of the most scuffed things I have ever made, period. We're gonna be talking about Linux today, the operating system that I'm pretty sure has shaved at least 2 or 3 years off my lifespan. Due to a number of technical difficulties relating to said operating system, large portions of this video had to be cut. Did I want to cut these parts out of the video? No. But the show must go on, goddammit. So I hope you enjoyed today's video on Linux. In case you missed it, there's been some talk recently in the tech news sphere about how Windows 11 is coming out soon. Matter of fact, at time of filming, Windows 11 is being sent out to its public beta testers just to try it out, make sure nothing breaks before, it releases publicly. And I'm not the first to say this, but Windows 11 looks like dog shit. You got high hardware requirements, encryption standards that a lot of motherboards just can't meet, and Windows's overall track record. It seems like Windows 11 isn't gonna be good. I've been using Windows 10 for nearly a decade at this point, and all in all, Windows 10 wasn't awful, but there's just a bunch of little things that I could do without. And frankly, I just don't want to deal with Windows anymore. It's time for me to branch out, time for me to do something new. You ever been talking with your friends about a project you're working on, and they just kind of look at you and the project you're working on and saying, "Why are you doing this?" That's pretty much how Linux has been for the past couple of weeks. You might be thinking, well, Pav, why do you want to switch to Linux? Isn't that like a hacker's wet dream? And it's so esoteric and impenetrable, and you gotta use the fucking terminal for everything you gotta do, and you gotta learn how to write a fucking programming language to even operate the most basic shit in Linux? Here's the funny thing, that's not the case. Linux is way easier to get into than I ever thought it would be. But here's the caveat that I have to put at the beginning of this video. Linux is not easier or even as easy as Windows. Think of it like playing a GameCube game on Dolphin versus playing it on the actual hardware. On Dolphin, you have way more options in terms of controls, resolutions, texture packs, online modes, the whole kit and caboodle. You can fiddle with everything in Dolphin. But on the original hardware, you just got a cube and a disk, and you put the disk in and it just works. For the past 2 weeks, I have taught myself how to use Linux. It's not scary, it's not gonna hurt you, you just need to put some work in to get the most out of it, which is why I compared it to emulators. And don't worry, everything I'm describing in this video will not require the terminal at all. Let me dispel that rumor right away. The terminal isn't required at all to use Linux. The reason why everyone teaches it to you when you're diving into Linux is because that's the one thing that's going to remain the same over all distros of Linux. Side note, a distro is short for distribution. So in this video, I'm using Pop! OS, which is a SKU of Ubuntu. And there's plenty of different flavors of Linux that you can use. But for the sake of this video, I'm using Pop! OS on Ubuntu. We're gonna keep that going forward. I'm going to simplify everything that I'm talking about in this video into terms that idiots like me can understand. I'm gonna show you how to game. I'm gonna show you how I make videos. I'm gonna show you some emulators. Cause look, if you're watching this channel, you must like emulators. Okay, here's where I gotta start explaining some shit. So remember when I said large portions of this video had to be cut? It's mostly about video production. I do want to talk about it, but just in a later video. Sorry for interrupting again, let's just get back to the video. So this is gonna be the only part of the video that's gonna be any tutorial-y-esque type or whatever. I'm gonna show you in basic terms how to install Linux, because it's really easy. So in order to actually install Linux on your computer, you need 2 things. 1, you need an ISO of whatever distro you're choosing, and B, you need a flash drive. System76, the creators of Pop! OS, have 2 distinct versions of their distro up for download on their website. One that has the magical, all-knowing fucking NVIDIA drivers, and the other one. If you have an NVIDIA card in your system, be sure to download the NVIDIA version of Pop! OS. If not, you can just download the regular one, it should be fine. The reason why we need to have this 2-system bullshit is because NVIDIA is being really cagey about actually making drivers for Linux. It's just how it is, it's just what we gotta deal with. By the way, links to everything I'm talking about are gonna be in the description. Once you have the ISO, you're gonna use a program called Belina Etcher to essentially etch the ISO to whatever flash drive you've chosen. And it's really easy to use. You pick the ISO, you pick whatever drive it's gonna write to, hit etch, and then there you go. you got a little distro of Linux in the palm of your hand. Small bit of advice, I actually recommend you keep this drive somewhere safe and don't like rewrite it or delete the distro of Linux that's on it. I ran into a situation where I needed to rebuild my installation of Linux onto the drive that I installed it on, and in a perfect world you would never need to do this, but I had this around just in case something like that happened. After that, you'll need to restart your computer and go into your motherboard's BIOS. The reason we're here is because we need to delete Windows safe boot keys or whatever the fuck it writes to the BIOS. Just go to this menu, select this option, you'll be fine. And if your motherboard BIOS doesn't look exactly like mine, I get it, look for something that looks vaguely like this. It should be under the boot menu. If you don't do this, then your motherboard won't properly boot into your Pop! OS installer and it just won't work. Don't worry, this isn't gonna break your Windows installation and it's not gonna break anything else on your computer. It's just some weird thing that Windows does. Once you've done that, go ahead into the boot priority menu and make sure that whatever flash drive you flashed Pop! OS onto is at the top of this list. Once you've done both of those things, go ahead and get out of your BIOS and start up your computer again, and it'll boot you into this clean menu. From here, you'll go through a brief installation process, and here's the cool part about Pop! OS and Linux in general. Once you've picked a few options, you can hit this little button down here called Demo Mode. You can run Linux off of the flash drive and just try it out. You can poke around a little bit, install some programs, maybe run some things off of it. I was able to call my friends on Discord off of the flash drive. That's cool. Can't run Windows off a flash drive. And this little option right here works for any distro. So if you see something that you like, just go ahead and flash it onto a flash drive, put it in, and just try it out. See what's good, see if you like it. That's the beauty of Linux. It's just so much more free and so much more open, and you can do so much more with it than what you can do with Windows. And that's why I've enjoyed switching over to it. After you're done futzing around, poking around, trying whatever you want, you can go ahead and install Linux proper. Just go ahead and pick whatever drive you want to install it on, and there you go. You're in Linux. Easy, right? And we didn't even need to override our Windows installation. And now that we're on the Linux desktop, we can go ahead and poke around in the Pop Shop. The way I understand it is that whoever's building your distro of Linux will package up a bunch of software and keep it in like a little fucking server somewhere, and you can just use whatever app store they have on their distro, and you can just pick whatever piece of software you want off of it. With the Pop Shop, you can install Dolphin, Discord, OBS, Steam, all without even opening a browser. And if you want like a smart person to explain how to install Linux to you, because good lord, I'm probably awful at explaining how all this works, go ahead and watch this video by Anthony Young over on the Linus Tech Tips channel. He does a much better job of explaining everything that you need to know about Linux than I ever could. I'm just explaining it like an idiot would. So let's say you futz around with Linux for a little bit, like let's say a week, maybe two, and you think to yourself, maybe this just isn't for me. Okay, cool, you can just go back to Windows. Look, the reason I'm making this video is not to force you to move to Linux or tell you that it's better than Windows or tell you that you need to do it or else Bill Gates will come and spit in your mouth. The reason I'm making this video is because I want you to be aware that installing Linux and using it is honestly way easier than even I thought it was gonna be. I've been interested in running Linux for a few years, and the reason I never got into it until now is because back then, I couldn't really game on it. There was just too much sacrifice involved, you know? I couldn't switch everything that I was doing on Windows over to Linux comfortably. And with Valve's implementation of Proton, you can play pretty much any game on Windows on Linux just like that. It's not gonna be as easy or as clean as Windows is gonna be, but you can still do it. And that's so cool, honestly, that a company can build a game for Windows and then it'll just work on Linux. And now we must deviate a little bit. There's one small concept I have to explain to you so that you can fully understand the hell I went through trying to get all my games to work. I need to explain the difference between a Debian and a Flatpak. So on Linux, on Ubuntu specifically, there are a few ways that Linux can store files in its systems. The two main ways that I've seen so far are Debians and Flatpaks. What the fuck does that mean? So, a Debian, essentially, is kind of like how applications and software works on Windows. You've got an application, and you've got a bunch of data libraries all across your OS. The application can then pick and choose from any data library on your computer. That means applications that are both Debians can interact with each other without any problems. A Flatpak, on the other hand, is basically the application equivalent of a walled garden. Flatpaks have all their libraries and all the data they ever need inside of that walled garden. This means that an application is totally independent and it'll work out the box and is probably more user-friendly. I'm not quite sure on that one, but it also means that it can't interact with other bits of software. A Flatpak can only talk to itself and the libraries it keeps within its walled garden. A Debian doesn't give a shit and will talk to whatever you want. And that is a little bit of context for the stress I went through trying to make Steam run. So when I first got Pop! OS running, I went onto the Pop Shop, I installed Steam, and I just tried to play some games. I installed Binding of Isaac, Risk of Rain, Doom Eternal, Ultra Kill, a few others, and only a few of them worked. I set up Proton properly, I made sure it was on the right version of Proton, and I just ran into problem after problem after problem. Dead Space 1 had some weird lighting and physics glitches. Ultra Kill couldn't make it past the main menu. Binding of Isaac mods just didn't work at all. And like 90% of the games I tried to play just wouldn't boot. And I was so confused. Like, I go online and I go onto ProtonDB, and all these people are saying that all these games run flawlessly right out the box and it just works. And I was so goddamn mad. Why wasn't it working? I tried every single thing in the fucking book. I tried everything that I could do, and it didn't make sense. I couldn't play video games. Then I realized what I did. So, when you go onto the Pop Shop, and there's an option between a Debian and a Flatpak for the specific app you're downloading, Pop Shop likes to default to Flatpaks. And that's kind of a problem with Steam, because Steam needs to talk to this other program called Wine. That's how Proton runs, and that's how games work. Because I installed the Flatpak, most games wouldn't work because they couldn't talk to Proton. Once I installed the Debian of Steam, everything just worked. It just worked. And I could play games, and I could put mods on Binding of Isaac, and I could fucking do whatever I needed to. I could play Ultra Kill. Fucking Ultra Kill is so nice on Linux. The lesson here is that if you want to game on Linux, make sure that you hit this button on the Pop Shop, and make sure you are downloading the Debian or the Deb of Steam and not the Flatpak. Otherwise, you will pull your goddamn hair out. Side note over. We'll come back to Steam in a second. Right now, let's talk about a bunch of other cool shit. Okay, so after that fucking nightmare of trying to get Steam to run, let's talk about some of the other apps I use on Linux. You'd be surprised how many applications just work on Linux. We got Steam, we got Discord, we got OBS, we got VLC Media Player, and we have Parsec. All of these that are staples of my Windows experience work flawlessly on Linux. And because of how cool the Pop Shop is, it introduced me to so many programs that I just never would have used. Things like Ardour, Goverlay, Wine, and Lutris. Lutris is really cool. So Lutris is basically like the good old games launcher, but for Linux, and you can even run emulators on it. So theoretically, I could have my entire classic games library running off of whatever emulator I want, all in the same library as my Steam or my GOG libraries. All that shit could all just be on one program. That's pretty fucking cool, not gonna lie. And honestly, I think one of the coolest things about Linux is that for the most part, you can just go into Pop Shop and update your operating system without needing to restart your computer. How many times have you had to restart your computer in the middle of some important shit because Windows decided that you needed to restart right now, and if you don't restart, I'm gonna fucking scream and Bill Gates is gonna come to your house and spit in your fucking mouth? I should clarify that there are some times where you will need to restart your computer, but the fact that you can do it sometimes without restarting is fucking cool and so relaxing. You just go into the update section, you click update all, and everything will just update. It's that simple. And not to mention, every single emulator that I use and every single emulator that I'm familiar with works totally fine on Linux. Dolphin, RetroArch, Citra, RPCS2, PCSX3. I switched those two around. Fuck. Fightcade, DOSBox if you're my dad. And they all work just as good as they do on Windows. Here I am, plugging a Wavebird into the GameCube adapter, plugged into my PC, running Linux, and it just works. It just works. A small side note, I recommend investing in a controller that can run in D input mode as opposed to X input mode. Because X input is kind of a Microsoft and Windows thing, Linux can interface with it, but it's kind of iffy when it comes to emulators. On the back of my controller, I can just switch it to D input if I like, and I found that that works a whole lot better than X input. So if you have the ability to get a D input controller, try to find one. So I've talked about the difference between a Debian and a Flatpak when it comes to Steam, and I brushed over some things like Proton and compatibility modes and versions and whatever. I'm gonna actually start talking about that now. So when you install Steam, the Debian, not the Flatpak, goddammit, you need to actually turn on your compatibility layer to make all your games work. This is known as Proton, and it's Valve's solution to making Windows-only games playable on Linux. If you're curious on how it works, it basically uses this thing called Wine, which is not a Windows emulator, but a Windows compatibility mode that like makes some of that code work in the Linux distribution or whatever. Look, you don't need to know how it works. All you need to know is to go to this menu, click this option, and then that's it. That's all you need to do. After you've installed the deb of Steam and you've set your compatibility mode, you're good. You can just start installing games and most of them will just work without any problems. Ultrakill finally got past the main menu. Doom Eternal ran flawlessly. Yes, even the shitty PC port of Dead Space 1 ran flawlessly at ultra-wide resolution at 120 frames a second. Like, come on, it just works. And if you want more information on this, you can go to protondb.com. Basically, it's like a catalog and a database of all the different Steam games and whether or not they work and how well they work on Linux. The main games that just straight up don't work right now are games that use either Easy Anti-Cheat or Denuvo, because those anti-cheat softwares just straight up don't work on Linux. So games like Destiny 2 and Apex Legends, maybe a couple others, you're not really missing out on anything. So, if anything, you can credit Linux as your reason to stop playing Destiny 2. Valve stated that they want all Steam games to work on Linux no problem by the time the Steam Deck comes out. They're gonna implement things like Easy Anti-Cheat and Denuvo, and those are all gonna work just fine. But it's really cool to think about how every single Steam game will just work with Linux flawlessly, hopefully, by the time the Steam Deck comes out. It's a big claim, but with how everything's going right now with Proton, I actually believe them. And if you're worried about online, I mean, I was able to play Risk of Rain 2 online with my friends who are all running Windows with 0 issues. I don't play many online games. That should be pretty obvious by the types of games that I play and cover on this channel. But, you know, if you're worried about that, just keep your Windows OS. Look, no one's gonna stop you from having a dual boot system. If you're really that worried and you wanna have some games on Windows, just go back to Windows to play some games. Another big thing that doesn't quite work on Linux yet are things like ray tracing and DLSS. I think those are coming really soon, if not they're already implemented, but I couldn't get it to work for whatever reason. Maybe I just need to tinker with it some more. But yeah, it's hit or miss. So don't go into Linux expecting a full ray tracing experience. And this whole thing kind of segues me in perfectly to the things that I lose when I switch to Linux. A big thing for me is that Elgato software just doesn't work. Elgato being the people that make the capture cards and the Stream Deck thing that I use regularly. Which, Stream Deck, Steam Deck, fuck. My setup kind of relies on the internal Elgato capture card that I have in my computer, and that just doesn't work on Linux. So capturing footage of a real console is kind of off the table on Linux, but if I really needed to do it, I could just switch back to Windows. The other big hit that I had to take was I lost a program called Voicemeeter Potato. It just doesn't work at all on Linux, and what it is it's a virtual audio mixer, and I use it all the time to reroute my computer's audio into all the different ways that I use it for recording. It's very complicated, and if you want a breakdown of it, you can go here on my Patreon and watch the behind the scenes videos where I'm gonna break that shit down. Fucking flawless shilling, yeah! Let's see, I think there's one more thing I'm missing. Oh yeah, Adobe! Fuck you, Adobe! I'm sorry, that was mean. None of the Adobe software works on Linux. No Premiere, no Photoshop, none of that. But that's totally okay, because there's an infinite number of programs you can use instead of anything Adobe related. So now we finally gotten to the big thing that I needed to make my transition from Windows to Linux. I needed to be able to make my videos on it, which is why I've been using Davinci Resolve more and more. Davinci Resolve it's just Premiere, but with better color correction and Audition and After Effects built in for free, or if you want the full version, one single payment. No bullshit subscription service, no dealing with Adobe, but that also means no Adobe Creative Suite, and some people just can't live with that, so you know, whatever. Other than losing all of my Elgato shit, I can completely move all of my video production process over to Linux just fine. So I'm gonna take this moment and make a claim in this video. Hey Elgato, you need to make Linux drivers for your Elgato things, because I'm not able to use them, and that makes me feel sad. I'm a white kid in front of a green screen, you gotta listen to me, I'm important. I've already switched over to GIMP and Davinci over on Windows, and I basically did that just to confirm that I was able to use these programs to make the jump into Linux way easier on me. That's the big thing that I recommend. If you wanna move your workload over to Linux, I recommend you wean yourself on Linux-specific programs that also work on Windows. We gotta get rid of Adobe, man. We just gotta. They suck. I hate them. Fuck them. And to be perfectly honest, that's kind of all I wanted to say. Linux didn't magically fix all my problems and make me skinnier and bring my ex-girlfriend back and do any of that bullshit. It's just different. It's a new way that I can do all the things I need to do and want to do. I wanted to sit and tinker. I wanted to just try a new thing and just completely switch over all of my production work right as I quit my job. Oh man. And honestly, I think this experiment went well. The only types of videos I'm unable to create on Linux are multiplayer videos and console-centric videos. And if I really needed to do those kinds of videos, I can just go back to Windows. It's sitting right there. I have a dual boot system. So while I'm not completely decoupled from Windows yet, the fact that I'm getting closer is pretty cool. I'm moving myself into an ecosystem that's more open source and generally more free than Windows or Mac OS. God forbid if you use Mac OS on any of this shit, Jesus. And it's just cool to see how many options are available to me just by switching over my operating system. I can still do almost everything I can do on Windows, just with a different coat of paint. And I'm not gonna lie, it honestly is pretty cool to open up a terminal and type in a little command, and that just installs a program, and you can run it through the terminal and be able to do, like, it's cool. It's cool to operate things in the terminal. Like I said at the beginning of this video that you don't need to use the terminal, but it's cool to learn. I mean, come on. Come on, I think it's cool anyway, but I'm a fucking turbo nerd, so whatever. I'm totally willing to recognize that most of you just don't give a shit, and you don't want to switch over to Linux just because you don't want to put in the extra work, and I get it. I get that it's a big commitment. I get that you just want shit to work. I get that you don't want to endlessly tinker with your computer when in reality you just want it to work. The overall purpose of this video is not to try to convince you that Linux is better or worse than Windows. What I want to say is that it's cool, I had fun doing it, I'm still having fun using it, and you should just try it. Like I said at the beginning of the video, you can run Linux through a fucking USB stick, and you can just try it out and poke around and do whatever you want with it. You don't need to commit, you don't need to install anything, you don't need to do any of that. So that's what I recommend to you. Take some time out of your day, get a little Linux flash drive going, poke around in it a little bit and see what you think. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't, but that's ultimately up to you. I can safely say that Linux has been the most frustrating fucking thing I've ever done on my computer to date. I have spent 2 goddamn weeks tearing my hair out, trying to do the most basic mundane tasks, and just the stress involved was worth it. I think it was completely worth it. Genuinely, I've enjoyed learning this new skill. And that means this video is brought to you by Skillshare. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have sponsors yet. Fuck you. This video is sponsored just by my patrons and my Patreon, the executive lads who make these videos possible and give me money. If you've made it this far to the end of the video, then let me tell you about my Patreon. My Patreon's pretty cool. You can get videos a day early, you get one of these snazzy name tags at the end of every video, and you get to watch special behind the scenes videos. So if you're at all interested in that, hey, Patreon's waiting for you. I gotta get to editing. Peace.